How late is too late in the day to drink caffeine? There's definitely a lot of individual variation here, but knowing the half life of caffeine would be useful, especially if you actually understood what the half life of a substance actually means. Hello, I'm Monica Reinagel, and this is the Nutrition Diva Podcast, a show where we take a closer look at nutrition news, research, and trends, and answer your food and nutrition questions. And a listener recently wrote to me after reading that caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours and wondering what that actually means. This is such a good question because while most of us are familiar with that term, half-life, few of us have a good grasp on what it does actually mean. You usually hear it applied in the context of medications and not foods or even nutrients. But even though it is a natural compound, caffeine is actually a drug. And that means that the tools that we use to measure how drugs move through the body apply here as well. So let's get into this. When scientists talk about the half-life of a substance, they are describing how long it takes for the level of that substance in your bloodstream to drop by half. Now, that clock does not start the minute you swallow a pill, or in the case of caffeine, take a sip of coffee. There is a short delay while your body absorbs it. But once it is fully absorbed and circulating, then half-life refers to the speed at which your liver and kidneys will clear it from your system. So if something has a 2-hour half-life, that means that once that substance has peaked in your bloodstream, it will take about 2 hours for your body to reduce that concentration by half. Now, at this point, you might be wondering why we don't just measure the total time it takes to leave the body altogether. That does seem simpler, doesn't it? And the reason that we don't do this is that the decline is not linear. So if the half-life of a substance is 2 hours, it might sound like it should then take 4 hours to eliminate it completely. But in fact, it'll take 8 to 10 hours before it's completely out of your system. And this is because the clearance rate slows down as the blood concentration of the substance gets lower. So in the first half-life, it goes from 100% to 50%. In the second half-life, it goes from 50% to 25%. Then in the third interval, it will go from 25 to 12, and so on. And this is referred to as first-order kinetics, and most drugs follow this pattern. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this, and the most notable of these is alcohol. So as soon as you have more than just one, or at most two, standard drinks, zero-order kinetics take over. And that means that no matter how much alcohol is in your system, your body will only be able to clear about 7 to 10 grams of ethyl alcohol per hour, which is the equivalent of a half to 3/4 of a standard drink. But, as I said before, for most substances, the rate of clearance depends on how much is present. So when there's a lot circulating, your body clears more per hour, and then as levels drop, the process slows down. Now, half-life isn't only about figuring out when something will be gone from your system. Doctors and pharmacists also use half-life to design dosing schedules that will maintain a consistent concentration of a medication in your bloodstream. And that same math also tells them how long it will take for you to reach what's called a steady state, where the amount coming in with each dose is roughly equal to the amount that's being cleared out since your last dose. And it's also important to remember that a half-life is not a fixed, universal number. It is an average based on studies of large groups of people. In real life, there's a lot of individual variation. Your age, how well your liver and kidneys are functioning, your body composition, genetics, pregnancy, other medications you might be taking, even whether or not you smoke, can all change how quickly your body metabolizes and clears a substance. Some people are fast metabolizers, others are slow. Okay, now that we have a working understanding of half-life, let's get back to the question at hand. How late in the day can you really afford to have that second or third latte? Caffeine is the world's most widely used psychoactive drug. And what most of us enjoy about caffeine is that it's a central nervous system stimulant. Specifically, it blocks the neurotransmitter adenosine, which otherwise builds up over the day and makes us feel sleepy. By temporarily putting adenosine on mute, caffeine sharpens our alertness, boosts concentration, makes us feel more energetic and upbeat. Now, of course, that same mechanism also explains caffeine's less charming side effects. So when adenosine can't do its job, the nervous system stays in a more switched on or ramped up state. And for some people, that leads to jitteriness, irritability, or difficulty falling asleep. And here's where half-life comes back into play. On average, caffeine's half-life in healthy adults is around 6 hours. So let's say your morning coffee contains about 200 milligrams of caffeine. 6 hours later, at lunchtime, you still have around 100 milligrams in circulation. By dinner time, you're down to about 50 milligrams. That's roughly the amount of caffeine in a small cup of tea. And remember, that 6-hour half-life is only an average. For some, it might be as short as 3 or 4 hours. For others, it can stretch to 10 or even 12 hours. Either way, however, if you have another coffee in the mid-afternoon, you are not starting from zero. You're layering new caffeine on top of what is still there, decaying from your morning dose. And that means your total caffeine load at bedtime could easily be as high as it was in the morning, especially if you've been sipping on coffee or tea or energy drinks throughout the day. And that can definitely be enough to make it more difficult to fall asleep, or reduce the amount of deep sleep you get, or cause you to wake up too early in the morning. I used to feel like having a cup of coffee at 2 or 3 in the afternoon was not so bad. After all, it would be another 8 hours before I was trying to sleep. But once I really understood these half-life dynamics, I realized that this was probably too late in the day for that much caffeine, especially for someone who occasionally struggles with sleep. That said, this is a time of day when energy can flag. So I do want to offer a few alternative ways to give yourself a little mid-afternoon energy boost. Taking a short walk, especially if you can get outside in natural light, can reset both your energy and your mood. Even 5 or 10 minutes of movement is often enough to bump up your alertness. If you just can't step away, even standing up and stretching or doing a couple of slow, deep breaths can help increase circulation and increase oxygen to the brain. And that can feel remarkably similar to a little caffeine kick. Another trick is to switch tasks. Something novel or slightly different can refresh your attention even better than another jolt of caffeine. And if you're not quite ready to go completely cold turkey in the afternoons, you might consider at least switching to a lower caffeine option. Tea, especially green or white tea, contains significantly less caffeine than coffee, and it also has an amino acid called L-theanine that tends to take the edge off of caffeine's stimulating effects. You'll still get a mild lift in energy and focus, but it's less likely to interfere with your sleep later on. And brewed cacao is another fun option, which I discussed in more detail in episode 414. Cacao contains a compound called theobromine, which acts on some of the same receptors in the brain as caffeine, but it's a much milder stimulant. And finally, a word to the wise about a couple of other coffee alternatives that get bandied about. Yerba mate contains both theobromine and caffeine, with caffeine levels comparable to coffee. And guarana is extremely rich in caffeine, sometimes twice as concentrated as coffee beans. So these are probably also beverages that you'll want to steer clear of in the afternoons. The truth is, caffeine's effects last a lot longer than most of us realize. Although it may feel like it's totally out of your system by 2 p.m., it's not. And adding another dose at that point in the day can leave you with quite a bit of caffeine still circulating in your system when you're trying to fall asleep. But now that you understand how half-life works, you can use that knowledge to time your caffeine more strategically and maybe experiment with gentler ways to recharge those afternoon batteries. If you have a question or a topic you'd like me to tackle on the podcast, you can email me at nutrition@quickanddirtytips.com. And if you'd like to find out about having me speak at your next in-person or virtual event, you can learn more at wellnessworkshere.com. Nutrition Diva is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast. Holly Hutchings is our director of podcasts. Steve Riekeberg is my audio engineer. Morgan Christensen heads up podcast operations and advertising. And Rebecca Sebastian is our manager of marketing and publicity. And Nat Hoops is our marketing and operations assistant. Thanks to all of them, and thanks to you for listening.